Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, supporting our two-spirit friends and relatives, the importance of allyship and healing. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health and the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. We would like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Syilx Okanagan people. Please feel free to introduce yourselves and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarain Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I am Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory Apache and Belgian on my father's side. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion, and joining us working behind the scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Kira and Nicole, our production assistants. They'll be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. Finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll provide a gentle heads up that the topics may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you are looking after yourself, and if at any point you feel that you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat for you if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. Wake Tanawik, Macbichin, Lat the Sikt, Sakumikwan's Quest, Eskedam Ulach to Sakwatan Scene. So, welcome again, everybody. Thank you. My name is Jordy Johnson. I carry the traditional name Sakumik, and I'm from the Eskedam First Nations, which is part of the Sakwatan Nation. So, yes, today I join as the Manager of Development with the Indian Residential School Survivor Society. Thank you, Sarain. Thank you, Cynthia, for welcoming us here today.
Awesome. Eg squale, eg quinisilam nala, antipax sulcilam, tinitsnak snout nawis. Good day. It's good to virtually be with all of you. My Hulkaminam name is Sulcilam. My English name is Jeremy Jones. I come from Snout Nawis on Vancouver Island, just north of Nanaimo. Mostly Coast Salish with a little bit of New Channel ancestry. I am the manager of the Trauma Informed Cultural Support Worker program for Vancouver Coastal, as well as the manager of the workshop coordinator position as well. So very excited to be here and very honored to be able to have a part of this conversation. So great.
Logging, good morning and grateful to be here. My name is Stephanie Penier. I come from Haida Gwaii. I'm from the Kalonis clan. My mom's Joanne Collison and my nannies are Jocelyn Allen, Ethel Jones, and Nina Edgars. And I come here as part of the Trauma Informed team of the North. I'm just super grateful to be here.
So yes, thank you everybody for introducing yourselves in the chat features. So as we begin here, we are going to, of course, welcome everybody, but we also want to take a moment today for our IRSSS family. It's in sadness that we announced the recent passing of two of our IRSSS leaders and board members, Byron Joseph and Charles Moody. So we would like to take a moment to share our condolences with the families of both Byron and Charles, their respective communities, as well our IRSSS family and loved ones. So please allow us a moment before we begin. Thank you. Thank you for providing us with this moment. Yes, we share our condolences with the families. And as Sarain has mentioned earlier, that some of the information detailed during this presentation, we are here to provide a message of hope, resilience, and healing. But some of the information detailed during this presentation may stir up triggering unpleasant feelings or thoughts. We ask that you take care of yourself during this time. The IRSSS does have a crisis line to provide emotional support. So please take care of yourself during these times. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy to start us off with some good words. And Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you for that moment of silence. Thank you for holding space with us together, and my invitation to folks, wherever you're at, to have that moment to check in with your body, see where you're at. Are you comfortable? Are you not? What's happening? And as we're doing that, we'll have a breath. And for some folks, that's a small breath. And for some folks, that might be a deeper breath. And when we breathe, we're in ceremony, because when we're breathing out, our body is letting go of what we don't need anymore. Our body is letting go of what's not serving us anymore. And when we breathe in, our body's taking in the medicine from the plant kingdom. Our body's taking in the gifts that it needs to continue on. And so any moment we're breathing, we're in ceremony, and therefore in every moment we are sacred. And saying that, I would just like to start off with a quick stichwia, a quick prayer, and engage with this in whatever way feels comfortable for you, and to know that to pray in your own way if that feels right. So, Heichka tzitzel siem, Heichka nechechesh delete you, stiquum, krinam stem, stichwia, creator, ancestor, our ancestors of our traditional territories and the traditional territories we find ourselves on in this moment. Humbly asking that you listen to this prayer, that you guide our words, that you be with each and every one of us and our families from the youngest to the oldest, that you provide that care that is needed in this moment and every moment. Heichka. Thank you for, and know that in these conversations, that as we're going through it, some of it can feel a lot. And so we might naturally want to hold our breath, but that's stopping that ceremony that we're needing. So to remember to, in those moments, to have that breath. Ichika. And I'll pass it back to Jordy, I think.
Thank you, Jeremy. So we did go a little out of order today, but that's all right. This presentation is a little more fluid than ever. So of course, there's myself, Jeremy, and Stephanie Penier joining us all today, as well as Serene and Cynthia in the background. So we'll just take a minute here to look over some of the conversations that we plan to have today. So we will be looking at some of the terms that is used in today's vernacular. Also, we will move into some of the teachings that we've learned from last month. So last month, IRSSS hosted a grief and loss workshop in North Vancouver. And we would just like to share some of what Stephanie has learned from that. And then we'll move into sharing some of our own stories from our journey and what's been happening within First Nations communities. We'll also be having some talk on the intergenerational impacts from colonization, including the Indian residential schools and beyond. And lastly, how can we make a difference, both as Two-Spirit people and as allies? So I will pass it over to Jeremy again to kind of share some of these terms that are used in our daily, vernacular.
Yeah, so terminology is such a interesting way of navigating the world, and how folks choose to identify themselves and how folks choose to be in the world. And there's a lot of different terminologies, and it can feel really overwhelming because it feels like there is like so many different opinions on what is the right way of navigating this, the right way of kind of addressing folks. And that's because everyone has the agency to say, this is who I am. And for some folks, we're still discovering that. For some folks, we have a strong understanding of that. And for some folks, it's like somewhere in between, which is really exciting that our people are starting to have identities and to be able to name that in a way that hasn't been done since before contact. And so a part of what's happening is there's this kind of big movement towards people referring to themselves as two-spirit. And that's a very important term and a very important history of identification for queer Indigenous folks. And the young folks are also starting to use indigiqueer because of not really necessarily feeling that the term two-spirit necessarily fits with their identity, which I think is really exciting. And so the terminology two-spirit was coined in the 90s by a group of queer Indigenous folks who didn't like the term that was being used to describe them because it was put on them by colonial ways of understanding. And so the group of Indigenous people talked about their teachings and talked about what it means to be queer and Indigenous, and they came to the determination at that time that they will be therefore known as two-spirit. And so this term has been a kind of call to identity and action and to the building of community and the reinsurgence of our teachings and our ways of honoring our queer kin. And that it's very important to know in this conversation that not all queer Indigenous people will identify as two-spirit or indigiqueer, and that that's an important kind of distinction. And so in the like, what is the right terminology, it's about asking in a way that feels safe and consensual around identity when it's appropriate. And that also leads to kind of how queer folks fit into the LGBTQ kind of community, because as queer folks, we're not always necessarily welcome in those spaces. And we've been making our own room in those spaces historically, and we continue to do that. But it's important to note that our safety is not always taken into consideration as queer Indigenous folks. And so that's why we have a distinction, and to know that indigiqueer and two-spirit are very close to folks who identify as LGBT who are Indigenous, that it's not an identity that just anyone can claim because of the history that goes along with it, and about respecting that history, and to know the importance of that name and that terminology. Which kind of encompasses so many things around gender expression, the diversity of gender within Indigenous communities, and that when we look at that, that brings us to this way of speaking and pronouns, and that it can be really tricky to navigate that because a lot of folks are starting to lean into gender neutral language, which is really exciting, but to also recognize that there are queer folks who will identify, with he or she, and then there are many that are non-binary, so the they, them pronouns are important to recognize, and recognizing that there are some nations that had upwards of 11 genders, there are some that had 4, and that the importance to know is that the diversity of our communities is such a mosaic of ways of knowing. So what's true for Coast Salish folks might not necessarily be true for Nuu-chah-nulth folks or Haida folks, or so on and so forth. And so all of this to say that because our people are so beautiful in their mosaic of Turtle Island, that there's never going to be 100% consensus around terminology, but to recognize the respect of our people when they say, this is who I am as a queer person, this is who I am as an Indigenous queer person, and this is how they are not separate entities, that I, as a queer Indigenous person, am not queer or Indigenous. I'm queer and Indigenous, and they're both a very integral part of my identity as Jeremy Jones from Snout Nellis and how I carry myself. Jordy, do you have anything to add to that rambling?
Of course. Thank you, Jeremy. You learn something new every day, and just listening to that, I've learned a lot already. But for myself also, I continuously am here learning. And for example, learning just on the pronouns for as it's been continuously changing within the recent years, of course. And just teaching myself how to be patient with, some of these, be patient with each other during this time, because it is a great time of change. It's an exciting change. So I thank you, Jeremy, for those words. Stephanie, do you have anything to add with regards to any of these terms that are used, or do you have any questions at this time?
Yeah, so that was one of the things too, is that just being comfortable with asking. So me coming along as an ally, it's important to notice, and yeah, building the safety in it and being explicitly like curious about what people want, because it can be really uncomfortable not knowing. It's like, oh, should I say this or should I say this? I just don't know. But also knowing that we have the ability to ask, and to just the act of asking really creates a space of being seen and being acknowledged and being inclusive and being included. So it can be really uncomfortable not coming from that community, and just beginning to be okay with the uncomfortable of like, I may get this wrong, but yeah, that's all in the act of becoming more inclusive.
Thank you, Stephanie. All right, we are going to come back to Stephanie in a moment here, as she is going to share with us. So last month, as I mentioned, the Indian Residential School Survivor Society hosted a grief and loss workshop for our Two-Spirit people. So Stephanie was present for that, so let's turn it back over.
Yeah, so last week I was invited by Jeremy and Stephanie to come down and just be a support for this, the Rainbow Healing workshop. It was 3.5 days, held in North Vancouver, and it was such an amazing, I feel really grateful and humble that I was able to witness. So I'll go over just a couple of like what happened during that. So there were 17 participants all the way through. And I really, really like it because it was very gentle. It was very, I love the way that the facilitator, oh my gosh, her name is slipping my mind.
Carrie Reed.
She's from the island. Carrie Reed. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Carrie Reed. She is extremely skilled in what she does, and holding space. You can definitely tell she's done this a long time, because she really has like a knack of creating the safe space. So everybody was just included. A very slow start of building the safety in the container, which I really like to witness. And you could tell that the participants really found their space within the workshop. It was all art-based, so everything that we did was different modalities of art, which again I love, because you have the freedom to just move the way that, and then all different art supplies. And it's funny because the way that she explained it, it's like art therapy can be like a sneaky healing. Like you don't really realize how much your brain is communicating and what's moving around just by the act of putting the pen to paper or molding the clay or using a paintbrush or what have you. But the amount of movement that happened within people was so amazing, so amazing. Okay, so then one of the main things that that stuck out for me from the participants was, I think it might have been the first day or the second day, but none of them have ever been in a room with that many Indigenous queer folks, never. And they're from all walks. Like there was some very young people, some very old people, like there's people from all walks, and none of them have ever been in a space where it's just a space for them. And also a big learning, like how we were just talking about, was how it's not a given, how for me it's a privilege that I walk in and I'm just like, no, it's in certain spaces, it could be a privilege me walking in and knowing that it's safe, right? Like I just walk, but for that community, like none of them know. And it was unanimous when they were talking about it, which I found interesting, that it needs to be explicitly safe. We cannot just assume that they feel welcome, assume that they feel safe, assume that this space. So like the main, I can only speak from my own experience, like I can't speak for like the other facilitators or the participants, but what I took from that is to be really mindful of language. And I feel like it's an honor to work with Jeremy because I know his language I really look up to, and I want to adapt some of the terms that he uses because it's very inclusive. Yeah, and it's a journey, like no one's ever going to get this whole thing right. So knowing that I'm going to screw up and knowing that I can come beside. Okay, so then I took a couple of notes. Allyship and how to support them. Yeah, so, and another thing for me, I know we're kind of going into allyship, but like we're going to go into it more later, but with that, it's like for me to be mindful of the space I'm taking up. Like if someone is telling me their story or telling me their experience, I can't say my sibling is, I know that because my sibling did this, or I like trying to trample over. So really understanding there's a fine dance between relating and building like a rapport, but also hijacking and taking up all the space and shutting them down. So really, for me, I'm working on asking and like giving as much space as possible, and knowing when I'm like overtaking. So what does that look like for me? I really valued that with grief and loss, it can be a bit tricky. It can be like trauma. It can be a bit scary where people are like, there's just so much, I can't take it on. But the way that she did this was so strength-based and so like she just normalized it all because it's a human thing to go through grief. It's a human thing to go through trauma. So normalizing it, also taking it bit by bit. And I really love the fact that she put emphasis on our goal isn't to get rid of grief. Our goal isn't to put it over there and not have it part of our life. Our goal is to honor the grief, to honor where we're at, to realize that we need to befriend that and hold that space and hold that piece of us that can be hurting. And a big thing that she said too was that big grief means big love. So when you have a really big grief, then that means there was a really big love. And I just loved all of it because it's so, I don't know, I can't think of the word, but it was very like moving forward, not getting stuck. Like it was just very fluid and everybody had a chance to share. And it was beautiful because like, we didn't, I think they might've took pictures, but they put all the artwork all over the wall. And then like, she's very skilled in what she does and was able to ask these questions of, because in the beginning, there was one art thing where they said, what do you want to get? And the amount of like similarities from the start to the end and like the flourishment and the movement, it was just so, everybody was having aha moments of like, weird, look, I did use all the same colors, or look, it did go the way that I didn't know that it was going the way that it was supposed to from the beginning, my first art piece, and then the end. Okay, I think, so pay mind to language. And it was beautiful the way that it was closed. Like she put a real emphasis on everyone leaving in a good way. And she was blown away because like the group was so amazing. But she's like, I've never had one participant wanting to close with song or like, and it's like there are Indigenous songs, but one of them was singing like just a song that they composed, and then someone came in and did some jingle. jingle dress dancing, and it was just so beautiful. It was so beautiful that I think there was like maybe five people that sang and brought in their own culture at the very end. And it was beautiful too, because they really honored the people that were like helping, because they kept the people that were like bringing out the food and taking care of us, they kept them consistent, which was good. And then they did like an honoring for them, and the people that got honored was just it was just beautiful. Yeah, and at the end they did like a blanketing, some teaching around blanketing down on that territory. They gave them some gifts, and yeah, it was beautiful. I feel really, really honored to have been a part of it.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I will just come back to, you mentioned that there were safe spaces created. Can you share a little bit about how that safe space was created, or was how everybody was made to feel more comfortable and allow themselves to be themselves?
Okay, so it starts right from the beginning, right from when people walk in the door. Like we were like, okay, let's acknowledge them and say, hi, I'm Stephanie, and I'm doing like this is part, and having intentional enough space for everybody. Like, let's put our stuff down. But in creating safe space, we need to know what we're going into. We need to know. So she was very clear about her intent and about what was to be expected to come. Also, she went in depth about her identity and where she comes from, her background. So it made everybody, well, I can't say everybody, it made me feel, and what I witnessed is people feeling safe and taken care of, because she knows her stuff and she knows her identity. Like that's a big thing, of knowing who you are, where you come from. And then she created this space, and I wish I could remember the question that she was asking, but we had to do like a kitchen utensil exercise, and that really like described where we were at, but gave space for everybody to so we know who everyone was in the room. So everyone went around and did an introduction of who they are, what they're wanting to get out of this, and a lot of like and a lot of laughter. I think it helps hold this space where it's like I can have these big happy emotions, but also I can have these sad emotions, and we're all going to be there to hold the container. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I do want to say thank you to Stephanie and Stephanie Penier, as well as Stephanie Holmes, who are both present, as well as Carrie Reed. I believe we had some questions in the chat asking for Carrie's contact. So right now I'll just ask that those be sent to communications@IRSSS3ss.ca, and we'll try to make that connection where possible. So thank you for that overview of that workshop. It sounded like it was a great time. And it's wonderful to have allyship in those spaces as well. All right, so we are going to move into sharing some of our stories. So to begin this, we will be starting off with Jeremy.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, also echoing my thanks to Stephanie for holding that space. And I think why that's important to do is recognize, I'll start and I'll kind of ramble and we'll see where we end up. So one of the things that I did not mention in my introduction is when I started off at the IRSSS, I was a resolution health support worker / LGBTQ+ liaison, which was a position that was made for me by my supervisor at the time, now our executive director, Angela White, because of my lived experience as a queer Coast Salish person navigating healing spaces. And so I was able to bring that to that work, and then now I'm able to bring that into this other position that I am now walking with. And why that's important is as someone who is really gay, really, really noticeably gay, hearing our participants. I wasn't there that much for the grief and loss workshop because I trusted my staff to hold that space. But to like hear that same experience of very rarely am I in spaces where it is all Indigenous and queer folks. And so navigating healthcare, navigating whether that be physical healthcare or emotional and spiritual care, it's hard to find people or organizations that understand the complexity of both the intergenerational impacts of colonialism and the intergenerational impacts of queerness, and how those intersect in my particular kind of lived experience. And so to know that this existed in this way was really exciting, because I remember being young and loving like dresses and skirts, and having been told that the world is a mean place, that the world isn't safe, and that I was very supported to be who I was, but I was also taught to be cautious. So when I was young and not able to fight to exist in the way that I am now, I was encouraged to not be closeted, but also just to be really conscious of where I do that, where I present in my most truest self. And so I'm still unlearning some of that, still finding comfort in my queerness, but all of that to say that I've never always felt, until recently, because I have a really amazing doctor, but I haven't really felt comfortable being able to really go in depth with my health, whether that be emotional, because with therapy or with counselors, because there is that fear of lack of understanding. And that's why when I took up this position, I was like, we need to have a two-spirit workshop, healing workshop specifically, because I know how hard it is to fully process my grief or my emotions in a way that is supported, because there's that fear of not understanding or judgment from people who have taken up colonial understandings of queerness and have not really come to the understanding. And I have a lot of gratitude to my parents, because I was really queer from a young age. There was no hiding it in my little sashaying around the res with I'd like put a towel on and pretend it was long hair and all of this stuff. And that my mom was able to sit down with my father and be like, I think our son might be gay. And the gift in that is my dad's a real analyzing person, like a really, he really likes all of the information. So he was able to start to kind of research queerness, which is wild. But why that's important and why I say that was because he had to unlearn and separate the trauma from residential school, because my father is a residential school survivor, and the atrocities that happened to him and my queerness are not the same thing. But the way he understood it for the long time, queerness and pedophilia were one and the same. And so he had to separate the loss of innocence that happened to him and who I was. And so he worked really hard at that. And I have a lot of gratitude, because I say the greatest gift my father ever gave me was himself, because he found healing before I was born. When my biological mother was pregnant, he decided he wanted a different life. So he put down his addictions, and he found healing before there was an IRSSS, before there was healing. He did it out of pocket. He found that healing. And then he was able to continue to find that healing in navigating my queerness. And that's not a common experience. That's not everyone's experience. And I really have gratitude for that, because I know and have friends and family and colleagues who don't have that. And I'm really cognizant of that. All of that to say that, I have a lot of, just that need for community is so important, and that need to revitalize, relearn, reinvigorate the understanding of positions in community, because our women folk were always held in the most utmost respect and a really high regard, and our queer, two-spirit, indigenous queer folks were held in a different high regard. In that, I see our young people, our youth, are so incredible in being able to reclaim those, or bring those back, or say, this is the way it was told to me. And a part of my job is I get to witness that, not only by providing space like the Rainbow Grief and Loss program, one of our partner organizations through UBC at Camp Out, and to know that, there are traumas, and there are queer elders who had to have really hard lives, but we also have our legacy of healing. And I'm a product of a legacy of healing in my family, in my community, and that, this is a part of the space that we're hoping to create, because I remember as a young person, that my idea of queerness and my idea of my almost my First Nations identity were separate. I was like, I know how to be a real good Indian, and I know how to be a really good gay, but for the longest time they weren't the same, because my idea of gayness or queerness was Will and Grace, and Queer as Folk, and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and those are all very much white folks, of which I am not. And so being able to unlearn some of those ideas and remember and find that and bring them back together has been really powerful for me, and I get to witness other folks do that. I think that's where I'll end this part. Jordy, do you have anything you're excited to add to that?
For sure. So I just want to say thank you for that wonderful story. It was very moving, very also provided some emotion to this. So thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. I raise my hands to you for that beautiful sharing. So yes, I agree that in some cases also visibility matters as well. And I say this for sometimes even that simple little sticker, that rainbow sticker, and just seeing that and feeling the safe space that brings, especially when going into a smaller community or a smaller city. Just seeing that brings a sense of safety for some people of the two spirits. So as well, it's not also sharing our stories, but sharing some of the stories that have been happening throughout the province. So there was a small remote community on the Central Coast who, during the pandemic, hosted their first Pride Parade. So just hearing stories like that is very moving. It's showing a great shift, a positive shift, that, they did have 60 parade entries, and it's wonderful seeing things like this happening where great initiatives are happening. Parents, grandparents, and children alike were cheering on their two-spirit LGBTQIA family members. So it's hearing those kind of stories. So of course, if anybody else has stories to share within the chat, or if they have other questions, please feel free. And of course, I just, Stephanie, if you do have anything to share or any stories, by all means, now we open the floor. If not, we can move along. Okay.
No, I think I'm good. I'm good.
So Jeremy, you did talk a little bit about those generational impacts, and I just wanted to see if you have anything else to add with regards to Indian residential school or any of the other colonization impacts.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to note that, like I touched on, that my experience and my relationship with my family is not a very common one, not a very, and that's not to say it doesn't happen, because I have that and other folks have that relationship with their family, but a lot of our traditional teachings have been skewed by colonial beliefs of queerness. And so there's a few things that happened. there's the people who took on the really dogmatic beliefs of the church around queerness, and whether, I'm not here to say that's right or wrong, but just know that there are a lot of homophobic and transphobic community members across Turtle Island within Indigenous communities. And that's a reality that people are often turned away because of that adoption of that belief. And there's also the like aunties who were like very much like my mom, who was like, people are kind of assholes, so don't be super queer out there, but you can be queer in here. And so a lot of that is why the Two-Spirit, indigiqueer kind of teachings are just now being brought back out, being remembered. And so and that's why creating spaces for queer folks, because it just doesn't exist so prevalently, and our voices are often not heard in the TRC's calls to action. They were heard in the MMIWG calls to action, but our voices and spaces for us are not made within healing Indigenous places, and non-Indigenous organizations do not understand the impacts of colonialism on Indigenous people and bodies. And having said that I really need to also iterate that our trans women, our trans kin are often more likely to experience violence than non-trans folks, and also have a vastly harder time navigating the healthcare system because of these beliefs that coincide with Indigenous racism as well. And so these impacts are really, a lot of them are shared experiences between survivors of residential school, of day school, the Indian hospitals, the TB hospitals, the 60 Scoop, as well as the experiences of our queer kin who are non-Indigenous, whether that be the AIDS pandemic, whether that be the Stonewall, the Little Sisters kind of thing that happened here in Vancouver. And so these impacts are just, they're different, and that's why the space is important. And also the impacts of healing that I think of Two-Spirit elders who really have shown up and like continue to be the people who raise some of our children, continue to be the like safe places in community, continue to be that like gay uncle who has big anti-vibes, who gives like the best side eye in the entire community. Like, I think our communities are so complex, and that you know, it's important to just know that it's not just a trauma impacts, but you know, our impacts are just as diverse as many other communities, in that a lot of the impacts are still within living memory, that it's not so far removed that, you know, there are younger folks who have lived experience in these impacts. Freddie, do you have anything to add to that?
No, but I do want to thank you for those kind words, especially when reflecting back to those maybe we would call them trailblazers, those who have been here before us, those Two-Spirit elders that are even still with us and still holding the torch for us. So, so yes, thank you. So we are going to move into the importance of allyship. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie for a moment here, and then we will connect back with Jeremy. So Stephanie.
So what is allyship? What does it look like? Yeah, these are just some questions that come up for me because I'm trying my best to be an ally. What does it mean to be a good ally? What does that look like? So when we think about an ally, it's about joining forces. It's about coming together. And one of the things that I said, it's one of the things that I wrote down, it's about using your privilege to support historically marginalized communities. So what privilege I have, use that, and what arenas do I go to where I can educate about inclusivity, about allyship, about coming beside, and also educate about what's okay, like what is acceptable and not acceptable on my part, and how can I model that, because some people are not open to obviously, like if you're in an activated state, you're not in a state of learning. So coming and modeling, I find, is like one of the best ways. So I need to do the work. I'm going to talk a bit about this, but I want everyone to know, like, it is uncomfortable for me also. And it is, I'm human and I'm going to bugger up. And that's kind of the process. That's to be expected. And also it's like, I have the ability to look the other way, whereas the Indigenous queer folks that live, breathe, and that's their being, that's their identity, they don't have the ability to look the other way, to not address it, because they experience it all the time. I have the privilege, like I can be like, oh, that makes me too uncomfortable, I'm gonna look this way. I don't want to deal with that, so I can remove myself. Where it's like, actually, really, like, it's uncomfortable, I can come beside and say, I can't fight the battle for you, but I can stand beside you, I can root you on, I can be as best support that I can to you. Is one thing. Give me 1 second looking. So how does it feel? And also like being cognizant of who's benefiting from this interaction. And motive of asking questions. We need to understand that people that have this journey of coming out, of questioning their queerness, of their lived experience, they have the authority and ability to share what they see fit, what they're comfortable with. And I need to question if they tell me part of their story and I'm like, I need to know the rest of it. Like, I want to know the rest of it. How did it end? What's going on? What are you feeling right now? And it could be too much. So really questioning myself before trying to dig around and try to push to get more information. I need to question who's benefiting. Is it my brain that's like, I want this, I want to know what happened. Meanwhile, I can be re-traumatizing or pushing too far. So really questioning where I'm at, what my motives are in going into the conversation. I have a couple of notes. And I know I talked about it earlier. I think this is really important about space, about taking up space, creating space. What does that look like? And what does it look like to come beside? So if something is going on and I have the ability to talk about it or not talk about it. So like I said earlier, be prepared to be uncomfortable and to say the wrong thing, to say the wrong pronoun. It's like, oh shoot, I'm sorry. And it's about repairing that. It's about us being okay with this uncomfortable. It could feel very childlike, very student-like, very much like you're like, this is what I experienced when I messed up. I'm just like, oh, I'm not used to not knowing, but it's so uncomfortable. But it's in reparation. It's in how you learn from that moment. It's in what you take from, if you have an experience, if you mess up and you call someone the wrong pronoun, they'll correct you. And then it's like, they're not correct. And even if they correct you in a crass way, or they correct you in a positive, like, oh, actually, that's not my pronoun. They both could be learning experiences. So what can we learn from that? And oftentimes when I've messed up a couple of times, and the people that I've gotten kind of like, don't call me that. And it's like, oh, like, I'm sorry, I was not knowing. So what would you want me to address you as? And it's to go about it with curiosity, love, kindness. I cannot emphasize this enough. The triggers that come up when you feel uncomfortable and scared, become curious about that. This is interesting. I could feel my heart going faster. I'm just feeling really uncomfortable. Become curious. And what is this? Like, why am I feeling this way? And also being curious and kind when people react in not a way that we were expecting. So yeah, noticing your own activation. So noticing when it's coming up for you, and also understanding that is for us to unpack and process. So in these conversations, in these interactions, when we're educating or anything is coming up, when it's coming up to me, it's unfair and unacceptable for me to put the emotional burden on the people I'm trying to support, on the people I'm trying to come beside. I can't put my emotional burden onto them. They can't do the emotional labor. They're already working hard enough, and that's unacceptable and not okay. So if something comes up, we need to say, this is interesting, and get a support person. They showed the lines, it's become very curious, and also like using it, if you can put the mindset on to remain teachable, to remain that this can be an educational experience, a teachable moment, that if we don't face it right now when it's uncomfortable, it's going to be squandered and it's going to be lost. I mean, and sometimes we're at capacity. Sometimes we can't take on more learning experiences, and that's okay too. We just really need to honor ourselves. Yeah, and I think that is all we have right there. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. And as well, thank you for being an ally, and also to those that are online. Thank you as well for being an ally. So I'll pass it to Jeremy if he has anything else to add on allyship.
Yeah, I think thank you, Stephanie. And when I look at the team that I asked to be at this particular at the Two-Spirit Grief and Loss workshop, I was very cognizant of who will be the best allies to hold the space, because providing that safe space was really important. And that's the thing, is when we're looking at, there's a very fine line between feeling uncomfortable and unsafe. And so if you're ever in a place where you're trying to be like the good ally, and you're like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, like really also take that couple of seconds to check, am I unsafe? Because if you're unsafe at all possible, you have to remove yourself from that situation, because your safety is always number one. There's a word, the language of my people, that's Aquan. And the closest translation that fits in English is to treat yourself properly always and before anything else. Because if we're not safe, if we're not okay to be an ally, to be there for our communities. So we need you as allyship. We need you. The invitation is to be here and walk with us as we try to walk with communities who need us. But we also need you to be okay to be there. And so we as a community will have really beautiful, smooth moments. We will have clunky, awkward moments. And that's a part of community. And it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be disagreement, but we need you. The invitation is here. All
right. So making a difference. So for this next little bit, we just want to talk about some of those wonderful first steps. Of course, just educating yourself and be willing to learn, so that you can talk to your friendship circles and share ways that you and your circle can be more supportive. And of course, I would like to open up the floor to both Stephanie and Jeremy if they have any thoughts on how others can start making a difference.
Thank you. I'm gonna just jump in. Yeah, I think because hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. I think one of the things that I always love to kind of like head off before it happens is what can I do? And I think a big part of that is being willing to listen. I don't have a need to be right, but I have a need to be heard. And I think, yeah, that kind of education, and especially not at the expense of the people who you're trying to be in allyship with, that those things need to be equitable. Finding the books that make sense, finding the podcasts, the things that people have put a lot of labor into already is really important. I think, whenever you can, and I'm not saying this is the answer, but to find those ways to make monetary donations to places that do work for queer Indigenous folks, or to support queer Indigenous artists, is such a meaningful way of, and like really centering that and really being like, if you have a store that sells things that aren't just your own, are we selling Indigenous products? And are we selling Indigenous queer products? Are we providing that space? And if we're in the healthcare, how are we making these spaces safe? Do we have gender neutral bathrooms? Do we have a staff that is educated? And how are we going to honor when we're going to be clunky? Because we need to recognize we will be clunky and we will have awkward moments. And so what are the mechanisms and protocols that we have in space to correct those, to make them right when they do happen? And yeah, just being the like great auntie, I think is such a, or uncle or like relative to like young queer folks or older queer folks. And just like, I think about traveling to Haida Gwaii and being invited to Stephanie's house and into to dinner at Stephanie's family. And just, it was like such a beautiful experience to be held in a way where it wasn't like, oh, we have the queer folk over, but it was like, we just have a human over, which was really beautiful. Yeah, I'm gonna hand it over to Stephanie on that note.
Yeah. Where do we start? How can we make a difference? We can show up. We show up. We be authentic to ourselves. We know who we are. We know what energy we're bringing in, and our intentions. You question your intentions. But there's things that you could do also within community. Hold some space. Go to the walks that, like the marches that you were talking about, or the pride parades that they do in different communities. And also, like, as an ally for myself, I feel like I wouldn't necessarily, like, I would be behind the scenes to help create the safe space. You know what I mean? I would do, like, it sounds funny, but like the grunt work of getting the food, providing the space, getting invitations out so people can come. Like, that's kind of where I feel like my role would be in helping to make a difference, is to just get on the ground and do it. Support people, ask. And you know what is interesting too is that I'm grateful that we're doing this. I know on Haida Gwaii, it's it cannot be very inclusive in some states, and people all gravitate towards Vancouver, where there's more of like an Indigenous queer community where they can feel at home. So yeah, no, I think like the acknowledgement, the education, and being able to just witness and be a support wherever I can. That's all.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Stephanie. All right. So at this time, we are going to welcome back Lorraine, and she's going to present some of the questions that have been asked throughout the session and the chat feature. And as well, if there are still some questions that you have, now is a great time. So we'll dedicate this next little bit for these Q&As. So Lorraine.
Thank you, Jordy, and Jeremy and Stephanie. We have a few questions here. The first one is, so this person recently learned that we can't name a space safe, but rather safe enough, because of the absolute safety cannot be guaranteed, but for all, safe enough and mutually accountable is something we can collectively aspire to. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I can jump in. I think I like that reframe, because I realize that as humans we are have so many different ways of navigating the world, and what might feel uncomfortable will in fact be unsafe for some folks, and what might, and so yeah, I really like that reframe, and so thank you for providing that. That's changed my whole perspective. So
I'll just echo what Jeremy says. So thank you to that person for sharing that. As I mentioned earlier, continuously learning each day as we go on. So thank you.
So it's like when you talk about safety, there's safety and unsafety. It's so black and white. So if it's helpful to change the terminology, like it could be like inclusivity. How are we being inclusive? And knowing that safety looks different for every single person. Like what could feel safe for me might not feel safe for the next person. So yeah.
Thank you. That adds a lot. Like, I know sometimes you kind of are in a safe situation and then some other people may not feel like it's safe, but inclusive and also other things that you guys mentioned is great. Our next question is there a list of Indigenous or culturally safe counselors in BC?
I could start off here and then I'll pass it over to Jeremy to gain his thoughts. I do know that Community, spelled QMUNITY, they have a great, and they are Vancouver based, but I think they do serve throughout the province. They have counselors as well that are very dedicated to, especially when it comes to queer support. Jeremy, do you have anything to add?
That was the one I was going to add. I think also because the wild part is that this is such a radical conversation, and I think, why is this radical? It feels very like it should be just this. I think a lot of these resources are still kind of being made, and so there's none that are like really concrete to the best of my ability. That doesn't mean that they're not out there, and that it doesn't mean that there aren't organizations like Community, like Transcare BC, like the Urban Native Youth Association, that don't have the CBRC, that don't have like specific, like they have specific Two-Spirit programming. So it exists within and because a lot of it ends up being like very lower mainland Vancouver focused is like one of the frustrating parts, because I know there's like queer folks don't just stop at like the borders of Vancouver. Like queer folks exist everywhere, have existed everywhere, and will continue to exist everywhere. And so IRSSS is also working really hard at focusing on Two-Spirit, Indigenous queer programming, and that I think the short answer is no, but I think there's stuff out there. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. And then our next question is being Two-Spirit / Indigenous queer a way of expression, gender identity, or sexuality, or both?
The answer to that will be as diverse as the people you ask. There are some Two-Spirit folks who, and they're all true. The other part is they're all true. So there's not the right answer to this. For some folks, it is both. For some folks, Two-Spirit is very much more about gender identity than it is about sexual orientation. And that's why a lot of folks, younger folks, are really resonating with Indigenous queer, and then a lot of older folks, because of the terminology queer, and that being a trigger, that being so emotionally charged of a word, really don't like that terminology. So when it comes to terminology, there's not the right answer, but there's many right answers that is maybe not super helpful, but also it's such an individual, it's about how the individual identifies versus how the community identifies. Jordy, do you have more? You were very muted.
For the first time today. No, I was going to say that everything you've said was beautifully said, especially when it comes to gender identity versus sexual orientation, of course. So thank you for sharing those words.
Thank you. Our next question kind of leads into still talking about Indigenous queer. So this person finds it interesting that the term queer is being used when a long time ago it was viewed as a derogatory term. When did that change and do all members of Indigenous queer community feel comfortable with that term, particularly those that are older?
Again, I think just echoing what I had just mentioned about, I feel like Indigenous queer is, like, to my knowledge, which is, there's gaps in what I know, but to my knowledge, it's like pretty recent, within the past like decade or so, whereas Two-Spirit has a bit longer. But also what's important to note is that both of these terms are based in English, so they're never going to truly represent Indigenous persons' queer identity, because English will not encapsulate our identities in a way that is very truthful. And as someone who knows like very little of my own language, and I'm looking really hard for the Hulkaminam word that describes who I am, there's a lot of privilege in being able to say that this is what our traditional word would have been. And so, yeah, there's privilege in knowing language, but also knowing that, again, these terms are both English words, are rooted in English. So they're trying their best to encapsulate Turtle Island, which is really, I would argue, impossible. Jordy, do you have anything to add to that? Or Stephanie?
No, just that also, and I think you've mentioned this earlier in the presentation, that, you know, both terms may be used by some and not often by a collective, but as well, some may still refer back to the abbreviations of 2S LGBTQI+ instead. So of course, it's just all dependent on the person's identity.
Yeah, I think honoring people where they're at and what they identify as is probably just too.
Thank you. And I just have a question for myself. I know that some people say two-spirited and then, or two spirits, or they'll just say 2S. Like, is there a correct term? I know I've seen like some things on social media that like it's just two-spirit, not two-spirited or not two spirits, or I just wanted a little bit of clarification on that.
The answer is that all of those are correct, which is maybe not so helpful, because that's true for the people who are saying this, and that truth is very valid and very real, as well as the folks who are saying, you know, with the S, without the S, and all of that is valid. And I understand it's like about creating that space in the taking up the place to say, this is who I am, this is who we are, is so important. But also, we're not going to have 100% consensus on, it's very much like First Nations versus First Peoples versus Aboriginal versus, like, there's like, versus Indian, you know, there's all of these things where people have very emotionally charged responses to that, which are all valid and true. Which is not helpful, but also hopefully a bit more clear. Jordy?
No, I'm just continuously learning from you, so thank you so much for it. But like you said, a lot of these were, these are English terms that we necessarily didn't have before. So within our own languages, and even within my own language of Secwepemc, I've learned some of these terms. I don't know it today or right at this moment, but I know that we do have words that kind of express this. So, so yes, as you mentioned earlier, Jeremy, these are English terms that, you know, we've kind of inherited throughout the past couple of years. So, yeah.
Also, what I will add is that there's someone named Harlan Pruden who has compiled a huge document, a living document of different nations' terminologies around queerness, around gender identity. I don't necessarily know how to access it off of the top of my head, but it's a huge, like a pretty big document of like traditional words from various nations across Turtle Island, across Indigenous populations around the globe, I want to say. But he's done a lot of work in kind of two-spirit identities and reclamations and strengthening those identities within communities. And so those words exist, and yeah, that might be helpful to also, because I also say when folks are referring to me, I'm very much like, you know, I'm about intent. So if someone comes up to me and is like, "Are you in India?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." But if they're like, "You filthy Indian," I'll be like, "What a jerk." But and very much But like my most preferred thing is I am Coast Salish and a little bit of Neutronal. Like that's the like that feels the best for me, but I'm not like for myself, I'm not super rigid about that. It's for me, again, for me, it's very about intent, and for other folks, it's very much different.
Thank you. That makes me a lot more like, it seems like it's a lot more inclusive than just being like, because I think I saw something on social media and someone was like, no, it's just two-spirit and that's the only way it is. And then I'm like, I feel like that's not like, I feel like people who identify with something like should identify with what they want to identify with, and like what you were saying. And so I like hearing what you were saying, and like I feel like it resonates more with probably with a lot of other people than just the one term. And we have another question here. So this person is wondering if an Indigenous person pushes back to you as an ally, what should you do?
I think I might need more context to that question, because I'm not too sure what that means. I think pushback is can be really important, but I think it would be like very situational to the pushback, because I think when people are triggered, they're not. When I am triggered, I am not my most effective self in communicating. I am not my most effective self when it comes to asking for my needs. And also like allyship is such a, again, in terminology, is such an interesting thing, because I think folks who there's like folks who are like really silent about their allyship and like do really beautiful work in community and like make space and provide support, and there's really loud people who are not, who I experience not to be like allies, who are like, I am an ally, and then take up the space in a room and take up the space in conversations, and sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. And so when there's that pushback, again, it's about that reflection. Am I taking up too much space? Am I saying things? Because also, not only as an Indigenous person or and a queer person, like I've experienced in both, and as one person, like people getting really angry on my behalf about something that I just don't care about. And I'm like, why are you angry? Like, I have no emotional reaction to this. Like, this is someone else's journey. Like, I don't need you to be angry for me, because I am not angry. I don't know if that's helpful or makes things more muddy. Jordy, do you have any thoughts around this?
No, but thank you. I also think that having strong allies are also just more important within those spaces to help us along with this journey. So like I said before, I raise my hands to those allies for being there with us as we, move along through these journeys.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting worded question, but I like how you guys answered it. Like it was like really got to the point of like that allyship is like, you can't really say like, hey, I'm an ally, like, because like it's same with cultural safety, like you can't name yourself an ally, like other people have to name you that. Like it's not, and it changes per person too, right? It's not like, oh, I'm an ally to this person, so I'm an ally to everyone. Like
yes, and usually it's a lifelong process of building that relationship on things such as trust, respect, and so yeah, I would definitely echo some of those words that you just shared as well on cultural safety.
sorry, it's just, what is the next question here? So we have someone that's white, queer, disabled counseling student. They wanted to educate themselves on how to be an ally, particularly in counseling space. They're wondering if there is recommendations for resources that they could look into.
I think, yeah, some of the things we talked about earlier. I know the UBC's History and Dialogue Center did a podcast series by Youth for Youth, and one of their podcast episodes were specifically around Two-Spirit identities. I think a lot of the things discussed in there is really helpful. I think there's a book by someone named Minnie that's got really good info, like lived experience. Like I think it's about, and at the end of the day, for me, the need in allyship isn't being like, I need the person who studied all the things to be the like perfect person for help. I need people not to be an asshole. Like I need people to be able to like sit there and like be authentic. Excuse my French, but you know, like at the end of the day, it's about like, how am I not being an asshole? And when I'm being an asshole, how do I be accountable for that? So yeah, I think research and education is important, but at the end of the day, what I need is a queer Indigenous person, is people just being authentic and being willing to see me as Jeremy from Snout Alice, who is queer, and they're not separate, which is maybe not helpful because I think being my father's son, who I also know likes all of the books and the information, I know that's also helpful for folks. But Jordy, do you have any recommendations off the top of your head?
Of course. Just last week, I did my first training and education workshop with Community. We mentioned them before. And I know there's other training and education workshop. So if anybody has any that they've taken and would like to share within the chat, by all means. But the one that I took, I was still learning, as I mentioned, where I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea about this. So that was a great learning tool for myself. And I believe that's something that even us at the Indian Residential School Survivor Society are planning to share those trainings with all of our workers to create that circle of influence. So yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any resources, Stephanie?
Oh, and Carrie Reed, of course.
Not tailored specifically just to this community. No.
Thank you. And then we just have a couple more questions. And the next question is, we have a speech language therapist that was wondering if you have recommendations for what to give to folks who feel the word finding and sentence formation of they, them plus verb conjugation is really difficult for them. So just wondering if you have any recommendations or suggestions on how to navigate the, I guess, like the grammar side of they, them sometimes.
Yeah, I think what's been helpful for me is mentioning that we as people do this already. It's just like taking the time to just be a bit more intentional about it. Like I don't have like the tool to do that, but to be like, we will talk about folks in this way inherently in gender neutral conversations, and it's about reprogramming your brain takes 90 days. So practice for 90 days, like with a lot of intent, can be helpful. And like just like reprogramming your brain that way. And so like just like have a 90-day goal can be useful. But yeah, I don't have like this is the tool. There's a lot of not randomly, but there's been a lot of labor in this kind of put on TikTok randomly. So like that's not maybe the most accessible resource to everybody, but there's a lot of like really great short videos around like this is how, and it's done really comically, but it's like this is how it's done. This is how we already do this on a day-to-day basis. Do you have any like resources, Jordan?
For sure. No, I will just kind of echo that we already use some of this, and I've also learned this through the community training, is that we already use some of this English, sorry, they and them within our English when referring to a person or people that we don't know. We may say like, oh, sorry, I should have thought of an example while you were speaking, but who does this belong to? Or, and yes, it belongs to them, because we don't necessarily, like, we already don't know the pronouns. This was used way before he and she were ever within our English language, that we would often refer to people within the singular as they, them.
Thank you for that. And then could you provide some tips and tricks for dealing with people who are not receptive to preferred pronouns?
I think it goes back to a couple of things. Is it an uncomfortable conversation or an unsafe conversation? If you feel like by having, whether you are a queer person or an ally, if you feel like you will be in emotional or physical danger, don't do it. Don't get beat up. Don't fight the redneck. Even if you can win against the redneck, just don't do it. Don't fight. That's not going to be helpful. But if you were uncomfortable, or you know it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, it's about finding the language around that, around stuff like, did you know that we've been using this language since before? We've been using gender neutral language in English, which is a bastard language anyways. That this is something that, you know, we've been doing since before really gendered language. Did you know by doing this you were providing the most honor to someone versus disrespecting who they are? Did you know is such a great interrupter to conversations with people who are really set in their ways. And that yeah, and again, please be safe. That is my, like, if that's all you take from this thing is in allyship, please make sure you are safe. Jordy or Stephanie?
Thank you, Jeremy. So I think we are closing, coming close to the end of our time here.
That was our last question.
Yeah. Oh, do we have one more question? Or
No,
that was the last. Okay. So I think we'll move into some of our closing words. So I would just like to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Sabrina and Cynthia in the background, for providing the space, and for those who came to listen. I hope you've all learned something. So if you have, please share some of those aha moments within the chat as you start tiptoeing away. But I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie to share her closing, and then we'll move over to Jeremy.
Yeah, I just want to say how I'm super honored and grateful, feel privileged to share the space, and I appreciate all of the questions. And yeah, that's all.
Awesome. Yeah, just sharing and echoing the gratitude to each and every one of you for being here, to UBC's Learning Circle for having us. My hope is that this is the beginning of conversations, that this is the beginning of learnings, or it's the continuation of conversations and learnings, that we are definitely not the authority on allyship or queerness, that these are our understandings of the world, and that we can't continue to move forward as a people without each and every one of you here. So Hechka, Seattle, for listening, being here, engaging. I'm very humbled to have been able to share a little bit of what I know. Hechka.
Thank you. Thank you to all our guests and to everyone for joining us today. And thank you so much, Jordy, Jeremy, and Stephanie, for your amazing discussion. It was great to learn about how to support Two-Spirit people, allyship, grief and loss, and all the other great things that you guys taught us. And just before we end this webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming UBC Learning Circles. We have Children's Health and Wellbeing Assessment, a strength-based app to measure FNIM children's well-being. That's on April 11th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we have the Past, Present, and Co-Development Future of Services for Children and Youth and Support Needs. That's on May 4th, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Sign up for our newsletter. The link will be in the chat. All of the webinars are free to sign up for on our website at www.learningcircle.ubc.ca. And thank you for everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Learning Circle. Thank you.